Hello, I am Challen the Edgy Skater, and I wanted to talk to you now about how to vet a skate fitter, and to also talk a little bit more about the different boot and blade companies. Okay, so let's get into it. I just did a video on how to buy your first pair of skates, so if you haven't, go check that out. But let's get into the fun part now. So, there are more boot manufacturers, to my knowledge, than there are blade manufacturers. And I strongly encourage to find a fitter that carries more than two boot and two blade manufacturers. And I can get into a little personal story time towards the end of the video about why that is. Okay, so let's talk about the blades because it's a shorter list, and I feel like it doesn't always get as much thought as the boots themselves. So this is already presupposing that you're ready for your first pair of boots and blades coming separately to you. Some of these boot manufacturers that have expanded into creating their own blades, sometimes on the earliest levels, they'll come together as a set skate. But anything above that level, you'll have to buy your boot and your blade separately. So let's get into it. I have a little list here so I didn't forget anyone. Okay, so the two oldest blades manufacturers, and these are going to be the blades that represent two different trains of thought as far as what blades can be on the market, and they're what every company I'm going to list afterwards has more or less based their product line off of. So the first one is MK Blades, and then their arch rival is John Wilson Blades. Um, and if you ever hear someone say Mitchell and King blades, that's MK. So these blades are literally made from the same materials. If I understand correctly, even in the same building, but they are two separate companies, both out of Sheffield, England. And they are the backbone of figure skating blades. If you were to look up um, every past uh, major competition medalist from 50 years farther, they're going to be in one of those two blades manufacturers. Now, things got a little bit different in more recent years because we've had boot manufacturers try to get into the blade making business. I personally think that boot companies should stick with boots and blade should stick with making blades. But Boots wanted more of almost more of a monopoly on the equipment market, so they've started creating their own blades. And those are going to be Jackson Ultima blades and anything from their offshoot lines. Um, that is the same Jackson as the Jackson boots we're going to talk about in a little bit. And the Eclipse line is Rydell Boot Company's own blade lines. So Jackson Ultima and Eclipse series are all going to be based off of some version of MK or John Wilson blade. It's not necessarily saving you any money to go with one or the other. They they try to cut costs. Well, no, that's not even quite right. They try to cut weight out of their blades because as you get into higher levels, um, we're trying to take as much weight off of equipment as possible in terms of grams. All right. So because MK and John Wilson are solid steel, or there might be a certain hollow part, but otherwise it is steel. Um, when Paramount Skates opened up shop, they were a revolutionary blade company because they, while they were still using design models based off of MK or John Wilson blades. The thing they did is they mixed metal types. So they brought aerospace aluminum into the game. They were able to be the lightest weight blades on the planet for years. And MK and John Wilson were trying to figure out what can we do to exactly compete with that. And Jackson and Rydell saw an opportunity to try to make lighter weight blades. So there's a whole complicated history why we do not see Paramount blades nearly as much as we see these other four companies. And I might save that to a special video. But in the meantime, when you see skaters on TV now, and they have blades, and it's not just like a normal stanchion in the front, stanchion in the back. It's sort of like this intricate, almost like web work from where the blade that touches the ice extends from the boot. That whole concept is trying to mimic the lightweightness of Paramount, and except they use a type of fiberglass, which has unfortunately has a higher potential cracking, chipping, or absolute worst case breaking rate than aerospace aluminum does. So it was their way of trying to have a comparably lightweight product, but trying to keep manufacturing costs down because fiberglass is a hell of a lot cheaper than aerospace aluminum. The good news, this is why I am personally just going to throw it out there and biased towards Paramount skates. It's not even just about the lightweightness. They cost a lot more to make, and the type of steel they use is not nearly as hydrophobic as the type of steel that all these other blade companies use. It's more like the kind of steel hockey blades use. They last longer, they don't rust as easy. They can take more of a beating before they need to be sharpened, which extends the life. But I don't want to make this sound like an ad for just Paramount. Just quickly going over my mind to make sure I'm covering what I want to cover. That is why we started to see different designs in specifically Jackson Ultima and Eclipse blades. They'll have different like cutouts in the steel itself, or again they'll have that fiberglass network. MK and John Wilson blades will be distinctive because it will always be a solid piece of steel from the stanchion to the blade runner portion itself. So they would be distinctive in that way. And outside of Paramount, which is actually the cheapest option despite the higher manufacturing costs, these blades are all more or less in a comparable enough price range. So from a budget standpoint, it doesn't really matter which of the four of these five that you pick. And I've skated most of my career in MK blades, and I love them. I've actually never tried any other dance blade than MK Dance, which is their highest level of dance blade. Every blade manufacturer has their own freestyle blades, which double for singles or pairs. There's not a distinction for that. An ice dance blade, and or a synchronized skating blade, which sometimes people will use dance blades for singles. Synchro, and I'll make a video using my own skates as an example to show you the differences between the freestyle blade and the dance blade. But some companies have actually come out with their own synchronized specific blades, which is awesome. And a much rarer blade type is one that does the patch figures. So the thing our sport's actually named after, those figure eights and other figure designs, there is a blade for that. I don't think Jackson or Eclipse or Paramount do it, but I'm pretty sure both MK and John Wilson have a patchwork blade, which is pretty cool. Um, so when you're a beginner, your default blade you're going to start off is going to be a freestyle blade. It just is. And I wouldn't even worry about replacing it to something more specific. Even if you know you want to go the ice dance route, you probably really want to get your beginner foundations really strong before you switch to a dance blade or a synchro blade, because they're so different. You might think you're sparing yourself time. Let me just learn all my fundamentals on this, even if it's an intermediate level, because it doesn't go below that. An intermediate level dance with synchro blade, let me just learn on that straight away. No, 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 no. You will save yourself a lot more frustration and ultimately money if you start off in freestyle, get a really good foundation, and then move on to a specialty blade later. But that's pretty much all I had prepared to say about blades. Um, I guess the other thing for price point wise is a beginner blade that comes separate from the boot from any of these companies will cost you anywhere between, I'm going to say, more or less around 150 plus. And the most expensive blades can be pushing just about $900. My dance blades from MK were just shy of $900, and I don't think they've gotten cheaper over time. But for what it's worth, I got a lot of years out of them. But let's move on to the boots. So, like I said, there are way more boot manufacturers than blades. And I do believe there actually are more blade manufacturers than what I have on this list. But in North America, as far as I know, in Western Europe, these are what your main options are going to be. I'm sure Asia has some. I know Russia has their own boot brands. Um, I imagine they have their own blade brand. And there's an Italian boot and blade brand I was trying to find that I couldn't in my initial search. So there's more that exist, but as far as getting them, especially to the States, like good luck finding them and ordering them. But this will get you covered. If you look at the podium on all these big competitions, they're going to be in one of these most likely, especially MK or John Wilson. So, as far as the boots, um, the two most popular ones in the United States are Rydell, which is an Australian brand, and Jackson. Uh, every skate fitter is going to carry those two brands at least. And like I said, I strongly recommend you find a skate fitter that carries at least three brands. But Rydell and Jackson by far the most popular, most commonplace. Now, Jackson is one of the most expensive boots brands, and I believe they're Canadian. And I know the import on Canadian goods is particularly high, which really jumps the cost of an already expensive boot. If your fitter didn't already have it in the shop, if they had to order it from the manufacturer. But I had said in previous videos that different boot companies have a different foot shape in mind. So Rydell is really good for narrow feet. Jackson used to be good for really wide feet. They still are biased towards wider, but now you have to kind of go for more semi-custom work to get as wide as they used to be a few decades ago. Wristport, I believe, is an Italian brand. They cater very nicely to wide feet and to an extent can handle narrow heel. So I have wide feet and a very narrow heel. At least I did until I broke my right ankle. Now everything about that is just wide. Another manufacturer, I believe this is a U.S. one, Harlick. They are they're more expensive than Jackson. I think they're the most expensive manufacturer on my list. but they do the most amount of customized work. So no matter how difficult your foot shape is, or whatever your orthopedic issues are, it'll be expensive. But Harlot can do it no matter what it is. Jackson kind of has, in my opinion, a quasi-ish low threshold for how much customization they go up to. Rydell is willing to do a lot more, but nobody does as much as Harlick. So if you have any issues, bring it to them. The only thing is a lot of skate fiddlers don't carry that brand, so you might have to deal with a Harlick company directly. Another Italian brand that is actually dominating the boot market in figure skating right now that came over from the roller skating world is Idea, sometimes pronounced Idea. Now, so far, all the boots I've mentioned are what we call a traditional model, meaning that there may be a certain amount of give at the crease where the ankle begins. However, when you lace it up, the tongue is holding you in place and you are fighting against the tongue on purpose by design. And that is where a fair amount of the support is holding your foot in place by pushing actively against something that doesn't want to give so much. Idea has an opposite philosophy, and the main idea behind this was more shock absorption. So, for them, the tongue moves very easily. You're not fighting the tongue. And they don't need to be heat moldable to your foot for a more, called a more customized fit on a stock option boot. How do I put this? Their sides are meant to hold you. They don't exactly break down. They're good and good and good and good until they're suddenly not. So if you ever see an Idea skate for sale and it has any visible crease, do not buy that skate. It is dangerous. You cannot buy that skate pre-owned if there's the crease, because that is beyond busted, broken down. But the idea is that the sides of the boot are going to hold you in a very special way so that you can get a lot of ankle flexion from not fighting against that tongue. And like I said, I'm going to try to bring my local skate fitter on. She'll explain this a hell of a lot better than I just did. And, apologies if you skate in this brand and really like it and I didn't do it justice. I actually cannot skate in this brand. I don't even feel comfortable standing in a shop without a blade on it. But that's, this is where you try on different things and figure out what works for you. Some things you'll like right away, some things you'll be on the fence of, some things you'll know you could never skate on it in a million years. This is why we do it, and we want a fitter who has options. Another less talked about the brand is Graf. So I believe this is a Canadian brand too. Another traditional boot, fairly high amounts of customization, used to be really popular, and people that remember figures and remember how skating techniques were before it got increasingly freestyle and jump focused, they tend to really like Harlick, and they tend to really like Graf, and they tend to really like the last brand I'm going to say after this, because those skates have a very old-fashioned feel to them that helps with a lot of sensitivity when you're doing such delicate work and needing to have very strong ankles and very high amount of control over your ankle and where your weight is over different parts of your blade on a full circle 360-degree curve. They tend to really like Graf. And I never got to personally skate in Graf or Harlick or this last brand. I've always wanted to try them, but their websites are up and running. I had thought that either Graf or the last brand is SB Terry. I thought one of them had gone out of business, but as far as I can tell, their websites are still running. So I don't know if it was a temporary thing or what, and still looking into it. But yes, SP Terry is right in that category as well. In fact, I've never heard anything but good things, and I remember skaters with a certain amount of orthopedic problems being able to get their needs met through SP Terry in particular too. Again, it just was not as popular a boot, so I think I only knew 2 skaters who'd used it, but they are very happy. And I imagine that with these brands, they probably have more. I'm guessing a more popularity in Canada, and they just didn't trickle down to the States in the same way, or it didn't maintain in the States as skating became more and more quad focused. Okay, so that's what I had to say about the boot and blade, boot and I can't talk anymore. The brands, all of the brands. Next thing I want to talk about is how to vet your fitter. So, there are fitters who don't know that much about the equipment, but typically, to be able to carry the equipment in the first place, you have to have a certain amount of knowledge and training from the companies about it. Let's say you have 2 fitters in your area, and one has a wider selection, but they're further away. The one that is more convenient to you only carries 2 brands. This happened to me, so I'm going to use this as a very specific example. This fitter carried Jackson and Rydell because they are the most popular brands. Now, Jackson is more expensive than Rydell by $100+, and that was back in the day. After tariffs and whatnot, it's probably more. Because I have a very wide toe box and a very narrow heel at the time, Jackson up front was the more expensive boot, but it had a harder time accommodating the heel. And a Jackson custom boot on paper was very expensive for the level of boots we would have been ordering. And so the solution that the fitter and my parents came to was we will do a full custom boot in Rydell, which is for a very narrow feet. They still had to order a narrower heel than what Rydell offered on their stock options, but we had to go very, very wide for the rest of the skate, and it ended up being very expensive. That boot, as a custom boot, ended up being, this is over 15 years ago, this ended up being around $1,100. Yeah, maybe a little more. And I still needed a almost $900 blade on top of it. So the boot itself ended up being about $1,100. In a world where there had been a wider amount of manufacturers to choose from, Rizport, which is by far actually the cheapest boot brand on that list, I could have gotten a boot, semi-custom, basically modifying a stock boot that would have been around $700 max dollars. The customization fee to take in the heel a bit. The boot itself, at the end of the day, should have been around or even under $800. So because of this, I ended up paying almost $400 extra because I was working with one of the only two companies this other person was willing to fit me in. And actually, I'm trying to remember if they had any Rizport boxes, if they were maybe just going for the bigger sale. Anyways, the more boot brands your fitter has, the more likelihood you'll find a brand that is naturally more geared towards whatever your natural foot shape is, and you don't end up getting pushed into higher sales or having to do serious hardcore customization on a brand that is not exactly designed with your foot by default in mind. So, if possible, always go for the fitter with the more amount of brands to choose from. If you never experimented with blades outside of John Wilson or MK, again, you'll technically be fine because that's what everything's based around. The boots are not like that. So it really is advantageous to try to get the wider selection, even if it means going out further. And oftentimes, your skating clubs, or even skating clubs around your area, even if it's not your club only, chances are they're not going to a bunch of different fitters. They have their couple of favorites, and they're favorites for a reason, even if technically on your Google search other skate fitters come up. So it's important to do your research to make sure that your fitter is knowledgeable and, yes, is aware of what different customization options are, new, model options, all that, but also making sure that they are keeping your needs in mind and not just trying to push for the higher sale or sales commission. So I hope this has been helpful. And if you are going to get new skates anytime soon, I hope you feel more prepared and enjoy your new purchases. And in the meantime, have a good day and a good skate.